out the truth that the things in me, and all I see is what I'm wanting to be. I was the center of my universe until I found that I was never the one.
Well, hello there. Hello there. Hope everyone is well. Continuing on with the Wheel of Time. And there's an ad break in 1 minute. Lovely. Everything's doing things today. Lovely, 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 lovely. So anyway, I hope everyone is doing well. For those who are here, welcome. For those who are watching later, welcome. I do apologize for my lack of streaming. My neck is buggered and I stream whenever I'm not in too much pain. Come on. Okay, one thing told me we were having an ad break, but Seribot hasn't, so whatever. Wheel of Time, New Spring by Robert Jordan. Chapters 1 through 12. We met Moiraine and we met Suan, and we met Lan. Oh, there we go, there's the ad. And that's the end of the ad. Welcome back. Right, so what's just happened is the Suan and Moiraine have just been raised to the shawl, and they have both selected the Blue Arger to represent them. Of the multiple different archers, which is the groups of the sisters, the Red's mission is to go out there and trap men and who can channel and tame them and, you know, gentle them, whereas the Greens are more about actual fighting and stuff. The Yellows are all about healing. The Browns are all about research, history, and knowledge. The Whites are all about logic, and the Blues are all about causes. Finding a cause, fighting for a cause, progressing a cause. I don't think I've missed any. I possibly have. I think there's grey as well, and what they do is they deal with legalism and diplomacy. Anyway, we are up to chapter 13. See? It says so right there. Gotta aim this. So Suan and Moraine have just recently selected the blue, and they have been shown to their new rooms, and they were talking about their the rooms decorations and stuff. Anyway, they could have had food brought to their rooms, but after Moraine healed Suan, they went down to the first sitting of dinner. Neither was willing to miss her first meal, as Aes Sedai in the sisters' main dining hall, where accepted came only by rare invitation, and novices only to serve at the table. It was a spacious, high-ceilinged room, colourful winter tapestries decorating the white walls, broad cornice gleaming under a weight of gold leaf. The square tables, their slender legs elegantly carved, were only large enough for four, and most spaced far apart for privacy of conversation, though today some were placed together to accommodate larger groups, the only women in the room wearing their shawls. They attracted looks from other sisters, not to mention a few amused smiles. Moraine felt her cheeks heating, but it would take more than smiles to make her give up wearing the shawl every time she left her rooms, more than outright laughter. She had worked too hard to earn it. Suan marched across the bright floor tiles, patterns of all the Aja colours, with a queenly grace, casually adjusting her shawl along her arms as though to draw attention to it. Suan was seldom shy. There were no benches here, but low-backed chairs carved to match the table legs, and where, in their own dining hall, accepted ate whatever the kitchen prepared, a young serving woman with the flame of Tar Valon on her breast curtsied before reciting what the kitchens here had to offer in the sing-song voice of one who made the same recitation often. Where accepted ate on heavy glazed pottery, and had to serve and clear away their own plates, the same serving woman brought their food on a ropework silver tray in dishes of thin white Tarrabona porcelain impressed with the flame of Tar Valon all around the rim. Tarrabon's work could not compare with what came from the island of the Athen Mere, but it was hardly inexpensive. Suan complained that her fish was too heavily seasoned, yet she left nothing except the bones, and looked around as though thinking of asking for another. Moraine had a rich soup of vegetables and beef, but she found she had little appetite, and in the end ate only a small piece of dark bread, and drank a single cup of tea. She had to escape, but there was no escape. Just walking away from a task assigned by the Amelin seat was unthinkable. Maybe the hall would decide the plan was untenable. No one had approached her concerning the matter since Tsutsuma had asked whether she had thought of being Queen of Kyrene. They might decide so. It seemed a thin hope, but thin hopes were all she could find. As soon as they returned to the Blue Quarters, Idith summoned them to her rooms again. Without ceremony, handed each a letter of rights in the amount of 1,000 crowns of gold. "You will receive the same from the tower each year on this day," she said, "or if you are not here, it will be deposited as you specify." The distaste of her earlier lecture had departed entirely. She wore a serene smile, serene and pleased at having gained 2 new blues. "Spend wisely. You can attain more if need be. But ask too often and you will have to answer questions in the hall. Believe me, being questioned in the hall is never pleasant. Never." Suan's eyes grew very round reading the amount, and, impossible as it seemed, wider still at the mention of getting more. Few merchants cleared more gold in a year, and many minor nobles may do with far less, but the Tower could not afford to have sisters seen in poverty. The Sun Palace had taught Moraine that power often grew from others deciding that you already had power, and an appearance of wealth could give that. She had her own banker, but Suan deposited her letter of rights with the Tower. In spite of an offered introduction, Suan's father had not earned 1,000 crowns over his entire life, and she was not about to put that son at any risk whatsoever. Nothing Moraine said could convince her. Safety alone concerned her, and it seemed a banking house old enough to have loaned gold to Arthur Hawkwing could not be challenged in that regard by the first bank founded after the breaking. Wearing her blue-fringed shawl displayed proudly on her shoulders, Moraine hired a sedan chair in the great square in front of the Tower, where the milling mid-afternoon crowd of strollers and hawkers, tumblers and jugglers, musicians and barrowmen selling meat pies and roasted nuts all kept their distance from the huge structure. Few people went nearer than 100 paces unless they had business with the Tower or wanted to present a petition. The two-bearers, husky fellows in dark brown coats with their long hair neatly tied back, carried her smoothly through the streets, the lead man crying, "Make way for an Aes Sedai! Make way for an Aes Sedai!" The shouting seemed to impress no one, and perhaps was not believed. Even when the heavy curtains tied back, the fringe on her shawl would remain hidden unless she propped her arms inelegantly on the window-sills. No one moved aside any faster than they did for the wagon drivers' shouts, and more slowly, since wagon drivers carried long whips and were not reluctant to use them. Even so, soon they reached what appeared to be a small palace on a broad boulevard with tall leafless trees marching down the centre strip, and unfastened the poles so she could open the door. The building was in a southern style, with a high white dome and narrow spires at the four corners, and broad marble stairs climbing to a wide, white-columned portico. Yet there was a restraint about it. The stone carvings, friezes of vines and leaves, were well done, yet simple and not overly plentiful. No one would leave money with a banking house that was poor, but neither would anyone bank with a bank that spent too lavishly on itself. Thank you for that follow. Yes, well, it is the prequel series, and I have VODs of all of the previous episodes so far. So if you wanted to listen to the reading, feel free to jump on the VODs and read along with me if you like. But it's the New Spring prequel novel. I'm up to chapter 13, as mentioned in the title somewhere down here. Where am I at? Here. How was your day, by the way, Vast? Or how was your night if you're just waking up? A doorman with 2 bands of red on his dark coat sleeves bowed her through the tall front doors and handed her over to a plain-coated footman, a pretty young man, if too tall, who gravely guided her to the study of Mistress Dormali, a slim, greying little woman with a full hand shorter than Moraine. Her father had banked with Elaine Dormali's elder brother, who still handled her own accounts in Kyrene, making her choice easy in Tar Valon. A slight smile broke on Mistress Dormali's usual solemn expression when she saw the shawl, and she spread her dark, red-banded skirts in a precise curtsy, neither too brief nor too deep. But then She had given the same curtsy even when Moraine had come in an accepted dress. After all, she knew how much Moraine had left with the bank on her first arrival in the city, and how much more her estates had sent over in the years. Still, the smile was genuine. "May I offer congratulations, Moraine Sedai," she said warmly, escorting Moraine to a cushioned chair with a high carved back. "Will you have spiced wine or tea? Perhaps some honeyed cakes or poppy seed?" "The wine, thank you," Moraine said with a smile. "That will suffice." Moraine Sedai, this was the first time anyone had called her that, and she rather liked the sound. Once the other woman had issued orders to the footman, she took a chair facing Moraine without asking. "You did not require your banker to stand for too long, stand too far on ceremony. I assume you have come to deposit your stipend. Of course, a banker would know of that. If you seek further information, I fear I put everything I know into the letter I sent to you, and I have learned nothing more." Excuse me, Emma. I hope you will forgive me for muting while blowing my nose. I do not wish to blow out your eardrums while I blow my nose. For an instant, Moraine's smile froze in place. With an effort, she unfroze it, made her voice casual. "Suppose you tell it to me again. I may winnow out something hearing it fresh." Mistress Dormali inclined her head slightly. "As you say, 9 days ago a man came to me, a Kyranian, wearing the uniform of a captain of the Tower Guard, and giving the name Rhys Gorthanes. He spoke with cultured accents, an educated man, perhaps even nobility. He was a good 3 hands or more taller than me, and broad-shouldered, with a soldier's bearing. He was clean-shaven, of course, and his face was well-proportioned and good-looking despite a scar about an inch long. Here, with one finger she drew a line from the corner of her left eye back towards her ear. So much for having the door open and letting fresh air come through. Yeah, it's only coming from the front. Cool. Neither name nor description jogged anything in Moraine's memory, not that she would have spoken if they had. She made a small gesture for the banker to go on. He presented an order purportedly signed and sealed by the Amelin Seat, directing me to lay open your finances to him. Unfortunately for him, I know Tamara Upsignia's signature well, and the White Tower knows I would never reveal the affairs of my patrons in any respect. I had several footmen overpower him, then lock him in an empty strong room. Then I sent for the real Tower Guards. I regret failing to take the opportunity to thrash his mistress or master's name out of him, but as you know, the White Tower law takes a dim view of that. The footman returned with an ornate silver picture and 2 silver goblets on a tray, and the banker fell silent until he had gone. He escaped before the guards arrived, she went on, pouring dark wine that gave off the sweet scent of spices. A matter of bribery. A grimace of distaste twisted her mouth for a moment as she offered Moraine a goblet with a small bow. I had the young man involved strapped, so I wager he still feels it when he sits down. I then hired him out as a bilge boy on a river ship running ice peppers to Tyr, where he will be put ashore penniless unless he persuades the captain to keep him on. I made sure of that by convincing her to give me his wages in advance. He's a pretty youth. He might persuade her. I think she had it in mind when she handed over the coins. Directing a level look at the other woman across her goblet, Moraine raised a quizzical eyebrow. She was quite proud of her outer coolness, as great as anything she had displayed while being tested. The false guard captain broke tower law, Moraine said I. Mistress Dormali blandly answered in the unspoken question. And I was required to hand him over to the justice of the tower, but internal matters I prefer to keep internal. I tell you only because you were involved, you understand. What's your ears for? Just a second. Moraine nodded. Of course, no bank could afford to have it known one of its employees took bribes. She suspected the young man had gotten off so lightly because he was someone's son or nephew, else he might well have floated downriver on his own. Bankers were hard folk. Mistress Dormali did not ask what Moraine knew or thought of the matter. Such was no business of hers. Her face did not even show curiosity. This discretion was one reason Moraine had never kept more than a little coin with the tower. As a novice without access to the city, it had been unnecessary, but her own sense of privacy made her continue the practice, as accepted. Tower law required equal representation of every arger in the tower's bank, and now that she wore the shawl, she did not want her affairs known to other blues, much less other argers, especially after what she had just been told. The only reason the tower would have held back Mistress Dormali's letter was that the Hall hoped to lull her into thinking they had decided against putting her on the Sun Throne, but they had made their first moves, or rather, since they would have been as careful as thieves trying to cut a well-guarded lady's purse, many more than the first. Enough for someone to puzzle out their intention. Nothing else explained a Caranian trying to find out how she was dispersing money and to whom. Her light, they were going to do it before she knew what was happening, unless she found a way out. She let nothing show on her face, of course, merely sipping her wine, letting the warm sweetness slide down her throat, all outward serenity. Much like Riddick, all back of the bus. You have done very well by me, Mistress Dormali, to the pain of your house. Please transfer a suitable recompense from my accounts to your own. Very properly, the banker demurred twice, bowing her head before accepting with a show of reluctance that Moraine barely noticed. Light, she had to find a way out. She began laying plans, not to run away, but to be ready. She signed over her letter of rights and before leaving gave instructions at which Mistress Dormali displayed no hint of surprise. Perhaps that was because she was also Caranian and so accustomed to Deus Damar, the game of houses. One house trying to fight against the other to... in secrecy and shit. Or maybe bankers were all stoic. Perhaps she had other Aes Sedai's patrons. If so, Moraine would learn of it only if the sisters told her. The grave was less discreet than Ilian Dormali. Back in the tower, she asked around until she settled on the name of a seamstress, no fewer than 5 blues named Tamori Alcohima as the best in Tarvalon, and even those who spoke other names allowed that Tamori was very good, so the following afternoon she and Suan took sedan chairs to Mistress Alcohima's shop, with Suan grumbling about the fare. Really, it was only a silver penny, and it had taken considerable effort to induce Suan to go with her. How could the woman think 4 dresses sufficient? She was going to have to learn not to be parsimonious. Mistress Alkehima's establishment, its walls lined with tall shelves bearing stacked bolts of silk and fine wool in every hue imaginable, was one of a number of large shops that occupied the ground floor of a building that seemed to be all curves. It suited Tamori very well. Fair-skinned for a Domani, she would have made Gitara seem almost boyish in comparison. When she came to greet them, their fringed shawls assured a personal greeting rather than simply walking. She seemed to flow gracefully between smaller shelves full of lace and ribbons, and the dressmaker's forms clothed in half-finished garments. Her half-dozen assistants all curtsied deeply, a young, pretty women garbed in finely sewn examples of their native land styles, each different, but there were no curtsies from the seamstress. She knew her place in this world. Her pale green dress, elegant and simple at the same time, spoke well of her talents, though it did cling in an alarming manner, moulding her in a way that left no doubts of exactly what lay beneath the silk. Tamor's languorous smile widened at hearing their order, and well it should have. Few of her patrons would come for an entire wardrobe in one visit. At least it widened for Moraine. Under prodding, Suan had agreed on 6 dresses, to make one for each day of the week with what she already had. For those who don't know, in the world of the Wheel of Time, basically everything's in 10s, so weeks are in 10s, 10 days. Just makes things easier to figure out, I guess. I think I was reading in the... it's not actually in this one. But I think feet are also, 10 inches to a feet and shit like that. Just knock it all to base 10. Under prodding, Suan had agreed on 6 dresses to make up one for each day of the week with what she already had, but she wanted them in wool. Moraine ordered 20, half with skirts divided for riding, all in the best silk. She would have done with fewer, but the hall might check. An order for 20 would make them think her settled in Tarvalon. She and Suan quickly found themselves in a back room where Tamora watched as 4 of her assistants undressed them to the skin and measured them, turning them this way and that for the seamstress to see what she had to work with. Under almost any other circumstances, that would have embarrassed Moraine to near death, but this was for a seamstress, and that made all the difference. Then it was time for the fabric to come out, for choices. Tamor knew what the fringe on their shawls meant, and the shades of blue predominated. "I want decent dresses, mind," Suan said. "High necks and nothing too snug." That with a pointed look at Tamor's garment. Moraine nearly groaned. Lights, and Suan did not mean to go on this way. "I think perhaps this is too light for me," Moraine murmured as a tall, yellow-haired girl in green and a square-cut neckline that displayed too much cleavage draped sky-blue silk over her. "I was thinking of Kyrenian styles without house colours or embroidery," she suggested. She could never wear Damodred colours inside the tower. "A Kyrenian cut, of course," Tamor said, thumbing her full lower lip thoughtfully. "That will suit you very well, but that hue is lovely against your pale skin. Half of your dresses must be of light colour, and half embroidered. You require elegance, not plainness." Perhaps only a quarter in each, a Kyrenian cut suited her very well. Was the woman implying she could not succeed in wearing a Damani dress? Not that she would. Tamor's garment was indecent. But there was the principle of the thing. The seamstress shook her head. "At least a third in light colours," she said firmly. "At least, and half embroidered." Frowning slightly, she rubbed her thumb across her underlip again. "A third and a half. Moraine agreed before the woman could go higher, as she seemed to be considering. With a good seamstress, it was always a matter of negotiation. She could live with a little embroidery. "Do you have anything cheaper, Mistress Alkahima?" Suan demanded, frowning down at the fine blue wool draped on her light. She had been asking prices. No wonder the girls with her looked scandalized. Will you excuse me just a brief moment, Tamor?" Moraine said, and when the seamstress nodded, she handed the length of silk to the Andorran girl and hurriedly took Suan aside. "Listen to me, Suan, and do not argue," she whispered in a rush. "We must not keep Tamor waiting long. Do not ask after prices. She will tell us the cost after we make our selections. Nothing you buy here will be cheap, but the dresses Tamor sews for you will make you look Aes Sedai as much as the shawl does. And it is Tamor, not Mistress Alkahima. You must observe the proprieties, or she will believe you are mocking her. But try thinking of her as a sister who stands just a little above you. A touch of deference is necessary, just a touch, but she will tell you what to wear as much as she asks." Suan scowled over her shoulder at the Damani woman. She scowled. "And will the bloody shoemaker tell us what kind of slippers to buy and charge us enough to buy 50 new sets of nets?" "No," Moraine said impatiently. Tamor was only arching one eyebrow, yet her face might as well have been like a thunderhead. The meaning of that eyebrow was clear as the finest crystal. They had already made the seamstress wait too long, and there would be a price for it, and that scowl. She hurried on, whispering as fast as she could. "The shoemaker will make what we want, and we will bargain the price with him, but not too hard if we want his best work. The same with the glove maker, the stocking maker, the shift maker, and all the rest. Just be glad neither of us needs a hairdresser. The best hairdressers are true tyrants, nearly as bad as perfumers." I have a feeling that not much has changed. Suan barked a laugh as if she were joking, but she would learn if she ever sat for a hairdresser, not knowing how her hair was to be arranged until the hairdresser was finished and allowed her to look in a mirror. At least, that was how it was in Kyrene. Once the choices of colours had been agreed upon, the forms of embroidery negotiation was necessary even there, as well as on which dresses were to be embroidered. They still had to stay for the first dress to be cut and pinned on them, a task Tamor deftly performed herself with a pin-cushion fastened to her wrist. Moraine quickly learned what the price would be for making the woman wait. The fabric she pinned for Moraine was a blue even paler than the sky blue, almost a blue tinged white, and the way she pinned Suan's dark blue wool, it was going to be nearly as snug at bosom and hips as her own garment. It could have been worse. The seamstress could have accidentally stuck them a dozen times and demanded a pinning for every dress, but Moraine was sure her first dresses would all be the lightest shades. The prices Tamor mentioned, once the pinned garments had been slipped off them and onto a dressmaker's forms, made Suan's eyes pop. Though at least she remained silent. She would learn. In a city like Tar Valon, 1 gold crown for a woolen dress and 10 for a silk were reasonable from a seamstress of Tamor's quality. Still, Moraine murmured that she would give a generous gratuity for speedy completion, otherwise they might not see anything for months. Before leaving, she told Tamor that she had decided on 5 more riding dresses in the strictest Kyrenian style, which was to say, dark, though she did not put it in such a way, each with 6 slashes across the breast in red, green and white, far fewer than she had the right to. The Damani woman's expression did not alter at this evidence that she was rather minor membership of a noble house. Sewing for Aes Sedai would count with sewing for the high seat of a house, or perhaps even a ruler. "I would like them made last, if you please," Moraine told her, "and do not send them, someone will pick them up." I can promise you they will be last, I said. Oh yes, her first dresses were going to be pale, but the second part of her plan was accomplished. For the moment, she was as ready as she could be. More water. So I've been told apparently I need to do some, review and exposition and stuff like that. I apologize if this cuts into your enjoyment of me reading the book. I really do like how, Suan is grew up dirt poor and has never seen that amount of money, and now she's being basically forced to throw money away on dresses. It's nice that she seemed to have stayed true to who she grew up as. Situations and money can definitely change a lot of people, and not always for the best. Although it's always nice to have someone come along and walk with you through the learning process of how to deal with a new situation, be it money or fame or anything like that. The sisters who had said that there was almost as much to learn after gaining the shawl as before were proven right in short order. Moraine and Suan had learned that the complexities of White Tower customs as accepted, especially which ones had been in existence so long they had the force of law, and the penalties for violating them. Now Raffaella and others spent hours instructing them in the long list of Blue Aja customs, accreted over 3,000 years. Suan actually retained most of what Raffaella said and told them during their first walk, what Raffaella had told them during their first walk to the Blue Quarters, and Moraine had to work hard to catch up. It would have been a shame to gain a penance for something so trivial as wearing red inside the tower. Red gems were allowed, fire drops or rubies or garnets, but the colour was forbidden in clothing, a matter of some long-standing animosity between the blue and the red, so old no one was actually certain where it had begun or when. Blue and red opposed each other as a matter of course, at times bringing the whole to a near standstill. The very idea of enmity between Ajas startled her. Yet there were other oppositions. While the green and the blue had seen few breaks in their accord for several centuries, the situation was far different regarding other Ajas. At the moment there was a slight strain with the white, for reasons known only to the white, and something more tense with the yellow, with sisters of each accusing the sisters of the other of interfering with their actions in Altara some 100 years past. Strong custom forbade interference with another sister, a custom that provided the sole release from the customary deference, outside the tower at least. And then there were the permutations. For example, the brown supported the whites against the blue, but supported the blue against the yellow, for the time being anyway. These things could last for centuries, or shift in the blink of an eye. It also was necessary to learn what antagonisms and rivalries existed between other Ajas too, where they were known. Each was a snare lying in wait for an unwary step or a careless word. Light in the tangle of it all made Deus de Mar child's play. Going back up. So I figured I would also review a whiskey. This is one I've recently gotten onto, and I thoroughly enjoy it. Possibly should have given my glass a bit of a wipe out before putting that in there. But what's the point of having a good microphone if you can't give a little bit of ASMR? So that's a single malt whiskey with a wheat alcohol as well. Has a very caramelized sort of flavor to it. It's sweet. It's smooth. I like it. And it hopefully should lubricate my throat just a little bit so I don't have to pause so much and cough. Suan heard her recitations every night, just as they had as novice and accepted, and she heard Suan's, though there hardly seemed a point. Suan never made any mistakes. They found themselves studying the power again, with Lelani and Natasha and Anaya, and others taking turns learning the water bond and other weaves not trusted to accepted, including a few known only to the blue. Moraine found that very interesting. If the blue included weaves among their Arja secrets, surely other Arjas did as well. And if the Arjas perhaps individual sisters, after all, she had one of... Oh, right. Talking about secrets, yep. After all, she had one, her first learned before coming to Tarvalon, and had carefully concealed it from the sisters. They had been aware the spark was already ignited in her, but she told them only about lighting candles and making a ball of light to find her way in the dark. No one lived in the Sun Palace without learning to keep secrets. Did Suan have any secret weaves? It was not the sort of question you could ask your closest friend. Although they knew enough now of Saidar to learn quickly. There simply was too much for a day or a week. At least Moraine could not do it. The method of ignoring heat or cold turned out to be a trick of mental concentration, simple enough once you knew how, or so Natasha pronounced. The mind must be as still and unruffled as an unruffled pond. Throughout, she said pedantically, just as she lectured in her classroom. They were in her rooms, where almost every flat surface was covered with figurines and small carvings of painted miniatures. These lessons always took place in the teacher's rooms, focusing on a point beyond your navel. In the center of your body, you begin to breathe at an unvarying pace, but not as normally. Each inhalation must take exactly the same length of time, and each exhalation, and in between, for that same space, you do not breathe. In time, it will come quite naturally, breathing so, focus so. Soon your mind becomes detached from the outer world, no longer acknowledging heat or cold. You might walk naked in a blizzard or across a desert without shivering or sweating. Taking a sip of tea, Nastasia laughed, her dark tilted eyes twinkling. Frostbite and sunburn would still present difficulties, after a time. Only the mind is truly distanced, the body much less so. Simple, perhaps, yet for above a week Moraine's focus might slip at any time, sitting at the upper or walking down a corridor. and she would let out a gasp as the cold suddenly rushed in and bit down 3 times as hard as before she began the meditation. In public, all that huffing attracted stares from other sisters. She very much feared she was gaining a reputation as a dreamer, and as a constant blusher. It was hardly to be borne. Needless to say, Suan picked up the trick straight away and never shivered again that Moraine saw. I thought I put that thing on mute. I guess not. Yeah, the strongest flavours coming from that is definitely a caramel. The Feast of Lights came to mark the turning of the year, and for 2 days every window in Tarvalon shone brightly from twilight till dawn. In the tower, servants entered chambers that had been unused for centuries to light lamps and make sure they burned the whole 2 days. It was a joyous celebration, with processions of citizens carrying lamps through the night-cloaked streets and merry gatherings that frequently lasted until sunrise, even in the poorest homes. But it filled Moraine with sadness. Chambers unused for centuries. The White Tower was dwindling, and she could not see what was to be done about it. But then, if women who had worn the shawl 200 years or more could find no solution, why should she be able to? Many sisters received ornately inscribed invitations to balls during the feast, and quite a number accepted. Aes Sedai could like dancing as well as any other woman. Moraine got invitations too, from Kyrenian nobles of 24 houses, and almost as many merchants wealthy enough to rub shoulders with nobility. Only the Hall's plans for her could have placed so many powerful Kyrenian in the city at one time. She tossed the stiff white cards into the fireplace unanswered. A dangerous move in Deus Damar, with no way to tell how it might be interpreted. But she was not playing the game of houses. She was hiding. Surprisingly, their first dresses were delivered early on the first day of the feast. Either Tamora was eager for her gratuity, or more likely she thought they would want the garments for feast day festivities. Tongue getting tied up. This is not good. She came with 2 of her assistants to see whether any adjustments were necessary, but none were. Tamor was excellent at what she did. Moraine had been right, though. The darkest of her 6 was in a hue a little deeper than sky blue, and only 2 were embroidered, which meant nearly everything else would be. She would have to keep on wearing the woolens the Arger had given her a while longer. At least all of her riding dresses would be dark. Even Tamor could not ask for a riding dress in too light a hue. Suan's dresses, only one divided for riding, displayed all the elegance Tamor was capable of, making them suitable for a palace despite being wool. But they emphasized her bosom and hips quite strongly. Suan affected not to notice, or perhaps did not. She really cared very little about clothing. Some things were not easy for Suan either. She returned from Satalia's apartments with a face that grew stiffer by the day. Every day she became more prickly and irritable. But she refused to reveal what the problem was, and even snapped at Moraine when she had persisted in asking. That was worrying. She could count on the fingers on one hand, with fingers left over, the times Suan had gotten angry with her in 6 years. The day Tamor delivered the dresses, however, Suan joined her for tea in her rooms before going down to supper. But instead of taking a cup, she flung herself down in a leaf-carved armchair and folded her arms angrily beneath her breast. Her face was anything but stiff, and her eyes were blue fire. "That bloody fangfish of a woman will be the bloody death of me yet," she growled. That half a week had undone every scrap of the sister's hard work with her language. "Fish guts! She expects me to jump like a spawning redtail. I never jumped so fast when I was a..." She gave a strangled grunt, and her eyes popped open as the first oath clamped down. Coughing, her face turned pale. She pounded a fist on her chest. Moraine hastily poured a cup of tea, but it was minutes before Suan could drink. Her mind must have been racing for her to come that close. "Well, not when I was accepted anyway," she muttered once she could speak again. "From the moment I arrived, it's, 'Find this, Suan. Do that, Suan. And aren't you finished yet, Suan?' Satalia snaps her fingers and bloody well expects me to jump." That's very nice. "That is how things are," Moraine said judiciously. The situation could have been much worse, but Suan's mind apparently had changed on that point. She did not want to start an argument. It would not last forever, and only a handful of sisters stand so high above us. "It's easy for you to say," Suan grumbled. "You don't have bloody Satalia snapping her fingers at you." That was true, yet it hardly meant her task was easy. The new lessons left her little free time, but she had hoped distributing the bounty would allow her to search among the camps that still remained. Instead, the 2 or 3 hours each morning she sat in a windowless room on the 8th level of the tower, just large enough for a plain writing table and 2 straight-back chairs. Mirrored stand lamps of unadorned brass stood in the 4 corners, giving a good and very necessary light. Lacking them, the chamber would have been twilight dark at noon. Normally, a senior clerk sat there, but whoever that was, she or he had left no imprint on the room at all. Only inkwell, pen tray, sand jar, and a small white bowl of alcohol for cleaning the pens sat at the table, and the pale stone walls were bare. The considerably larger outer room was crowded by rows of high, narrow writing desks and tall stools, but as soon as she arrived, the clerks formed a line and then stretched from her writing table and nearly circled their own room, bringing their lists of women who had received the bounty and reports on arrangements to send the money to women who had already left. The number of those reports was distressing. Few camps remained, and the last were melting away like frost in sunlight. None of the clerks used her second chair, only stood respectfully while she read each page and signed her approval at the bottom, then curtsied or bowed and made way for the next without a word. Very quickly she began to think it might be possible to die of boredom. She tried to make them arrange the distribution faster. The tower's vast resources could have seen to it in a week, surely. The tower held hundreds more clerks, but clerks worked at their own pace. They even seemed to slow down after her suggestion of speed. She considered begging Tamra to release her from the task. But why put herself to useless effort? What better way to keep her shackled in Tar Valon until the whole schemes came to fruition, boredom and frustration? She had her plan. That helped, a bit. Slowly, a conviction settled in her. If worse came to worse, she would run, whatever penance that earned her. Any penance lay in the future, and she must end eventually. The Sun Throne would be a sentence for life. The day after the Feast of Lights, Elid summoned her to her testing, though Moraine only heard of it after. The beautiful accepted who wanted to become a green failed to come out of the terangrial. There was no announcement. The White Tower never flaunted its failures, and a woman dying in her test was counted as a great failure on the Tower's part. Elid simply disappeared, and her belongings were taken away. There was a day of mourning, however, and Moraine wore white ribbons in her hair and tied a long lace-edged white silk kerchief around each arm so they dangled to her wrists. She had never liked Elid, but the woman deserved her grief. Not every sister who was strong enough to make the jump showed any desire to do so. Elida avoided them, or at least they did not see her again before hearing she had left to return to Andor. Even so, learning she was gone was a relief. She stood as high as they would one day, and could have made their lives a misery almost as badly as she had when they were novice and accepted, perhaps worse. The petty errands novice and accepted took as expected would have been near a penance for them as Aes Sedai, perhaps more than near. Lelaine, who stood as high as Elida and was a sitter to boot, had them to tea several times to ease the strain of the first weeks, as she put it. Siuan got on very well with her, though she made Moraine a little nervous with that penetrating gaze. It always seemed that Lelaine knew more of you than she revealed, that you had no secrets with her. But then Siuan had appeared unable to understand Moraine's liking for Anaya. It was not the healing. Anaya was warm and open, and made you feel that you could come out, that all would come out well in the end. Almost any conversation with Anaya turned out comforting. Moraine thought that in time she might become as close a friend as Leanne, if not so close as Siuan. That friendship with Leanne took up right where it had left off, for her and Siuan both, and brought with it Adine Canford, a plump blue-eyed woman with short-cut black hair, who displayed not a hint of arrogance despite being Andoran. Of course, she was not very strong in the power. It really was becoming second nature to consider that. They renewed acquaintance with sisters of other Argers who'd been accepted with them, and found that in some cases friendship revived within a few words, and in others had shrunk to a mere amity. While a few had grown too accustomed to the gap between Aes Sedai and accepted to close it again now that they wore the shawl too. It was enough. Friends lightened many burdens, even those they did not know of. Friends or no friends, though, the days passed with glacial slowness. Mylin finally departed the tower, then Kirine, followed in turn by Aisha, Ludis and Valera, but Moraine's relief that the search was underway at last was tempered by frustration at being kept out of it. Siuan began to grow interested in her job, to the point where her complaints started to seem more for the form of the thing. She headed off to Satalia's rooms earlier than need be, and often remained until the second or third sitting of supper. Moraine had no such buffer. Her nightmares continued, of the babe in the snow and the faceless man in the sun throne, although not as frequently, save the last. Ever as bad, though. She banished most of the lace and ruffles from her rooms, which required only a visit to the cushion maker and a small wait for the alteration by 2s and 3s. Not all, because Anaya's obvious, if silent, disappointment at seeing them go, so her bed remained an ocean of froth that made Siuan giggle with delight. But she spent more time in her other rooms, and so the bed it had to be. After numerous efforts, she managed to bake a pie without burning it black, but Aeldra took one bite and turned pale green. Siuan produced a fish pie that the grey-haired sister declared quite tasty. Only within the hour she was running for the privy and required healing. No one accused them of doing anything deliberate, which they had not, but Anaya and Chiron thought it an excellent repayment for greediness. Naturally. After Only a week after Eled, on High Chasseline, Sheriam was tested and passed. Technically, Suan was the newest blue by a hair, but Satalia refused to lose her services for even a few hours. So it was Moraine who laid the shawl on the firehead Saldean shoulders when she chose the blue the following day, and escorted her beaming back to the blue quarters for the welcome, where Suan managed to nip in for the sixth kiss. Sheriam was a good cook and loved to bake. It was the day of reflection in Cairene, yet Moraine could not manage to dwell on her sins and faults. She and Suan had regained a friend they had feared might be lost for a year. Suan even suggested bringing Sheriam into their search, and talking her out of it required hours. It was not that Moraine feared Sheriam would expose them to Tamra, but Sheriam had been one of her biggest gossips in the accepted quarters. She never told what she promised to keep hidden, yet she would be unable to resist giving hints of such a juicy secret, hints that she had a secret, as Suan should have known very well. Let others know you possessed a secret, and some would work to learn it. That was a fact of nature. Sometimes Suan did not know the meaning of caution. Sometimes, never. Sisters began to talk of a resurgence in the tower, with so many passing for the shawl in so short a time, and perhaps another one or two who might very soon. By custom none spoke of Elid, but Moraine thought of her. 1 woman dead and 3 raised to the shawl in the space of 2 weeks. But the only novice to test for accepted in that time had failed and been sent away, and not 1 name was added to the novice book, while above 20 novices too weak to ever reach the shawl were put out. Those chambers would remain unused for centuries more at this rate, until they were all unused. Suan tried to soothe her, but how could she be happy when the White Tower was destined to become a monument to the dead? 3 days later, Moraine wished she had spent the day of reflection properly. She was not superstitious, but failure to do so always brought ill luck to someone you cared for. So it was said. She was at the second sitting of breakfast, slowly eating her porridge and fretting over For those who are not stuck in ad hell, please take a moment to have a quick sip of water or something. And welcome back from the ads. She was not superstitious, but failure to do so always brought ill luck to someone you cared for, so it was said. She was at the second sitting of breakfast, slowly eating her porridge and fretting over the boredom of torture by clerk to come, when Reimer Galfrey glided into the dining hall, slim and elegant in yellow/green, much of a height with Moraine. She was not one of those Moraine needed to defer to, but she had a regal bearing, accentuated by rubies in her hair like a crown, and a haughty cast typical of yellows to her face. Startlingly, she wove air and fire to make her voice clearly audible in every corner of the dining hall. Last night, Tamra Ospania, the Watcher of the Seals, the Flame of Tarvalon, the Amelin seat, died in her sleep. May the light shine on her soul. Her voice was perfectly self-possessed, as though she had announced it would rain that day. She waited only long enough to run a cool eye over the room to make sure her words had been absorbed before leaving. A buzz of talk started up immediately at the other tables, but Moraine sat stunned. Aes Sedai died before their time as often as anyone else did, and sisters did not grow feeble from the years. Death came in an apparent full good health, yet this was so unexpected that she felt hit on the head by a hammer. The light illuminate Tamra's soul, she prayed silently. The light illuminate her soul, surely it would. What would happen to the search for the boy-child now? Nothing, of course. Tamra's chosen searchers knew their task. They would inform the new Amelin of their task. Perhaps the new Amelin would release her from her own labour if she got to the woman before the hall informed her of their scheme. Self-disgust immediately stabbed her heart, and she pushed the bowl of porridge away, all appetite gone. A woman she admired with all her soul had died, and she thought of advantage to it. Deus Damar truly was ingrained in her bones, and maybe all the darkness of the Damodrids. She very nearly asked Marine for a penance, but the mistress of novices might give her something that would hold her in Tarvalong longer. Considering that just added to her guilt. So she set her own penance. Only one dress she owned came close to the white of grieving. The blue so pale it seemed more white tinged with blue, so she put that on for Tamra's funeral rites. Tamor had embroidered the garment front and back and sleeves with a fine, intricate blue mesh that looked innocent enough until she actually donned the dress. Then it seemed as blatant as what the seamstress herself had worn. No, not seemed, it was. She very nearly wept after examining herself in the stand mirror. Suan blinked at the sight of her in the corridor outside their rooms. "Are you sure you want to wear that?" She sounded half-strangled. Long white ribbons were tied in her hair and longer tied around her arms. The passing sisters all wore variations of the same. Aes Sedai never put on full mourning except for whites, who did not consider it so. "Sometimes a penance is required," Moraine replied, deliberately moving her shawl down in the crooks of her elbows, and Suan asked no more. There were questions one asked, and questions one did not. That was a strong custom, and friendship. Wearing their shawls, every sister residing in the tower gathered at a secluded clearing in a woody part of the tower grounds, where Tamra's body lay on a bier, sewn into a simple blue shroud. The morning air was more than brisk. Moraine was aware of that despite feeling no urge to shiver, and even the surrounding oaks were still leafless beneath the grey sky, their thick twisted limbs suitable framing for a funeral. Hannah, I know you're lurking. If this is too much for you, feel free to mute. Moraine's garment earned her more than a few raised eyebrows, but the sister's disapproval was part of her penance. Mortification of the spirit was always the hardest to endure. Strangely, the whites all wore glossy black ribbons, yet it must have been an Arger custom, for it garnered no frowns or stares from the other sisters. They must have seen it before. Any who wished were allowed to speak a prayer or a few words in memory, and most did. Only the sitters spoke among the Reds, and then in very few words, but perhaps that was custom as well. Moraine made herself go forward and stand before the bier, shawl loosely draped, exposing herself, knowing she would be the focus of every eye, the hardest to bear. May the light illuminate Tamra's soul, brightly as she deserved, and may she shelter in the Creator's hand until her rebirth. The light send her a radiant rebirth. I cannot think of any woman I admired more than Tamra. I will admire her and honour her still. I always will. Tears welled in her eyes, and not from the humiliation that stabbed her long like thorns. She had never really known Tamra. Novices and accepted never really knew sisters, much less the Amelin seed, but light she would miss her. According to Tamra's wishes, her body was consumed by flows of fire, and her ashes scattered across the grounds of the White Tower by the sisters of the Arger she had been raised from, the Arger to which she had returned in death. Moraine was not alone in weeping. Aes Sedai's serenity could not armour against all things. The rest of the day she wore that shaming dress, and that night burned it. She would never have been able to look at it again without remembering. Until a new Amelin was raised, the hall of the tower reigned over the tower. But there were increasingly strict measures in law to ensure that they did not dally too long, and by the evening after Tamra's funeral, Seren Vayu had been raised from the grey, and Amelin was supposed to grant indulgences and relief from penances on the day she assumed the stole and the staff. None came from Seren, and in the space of half a week, every last male clerk in the tower had been dismissed without a character, supposedly for flirting with novices or accepted, or for inappropriate looks and glances, which could have meant anything. Even men so old their grandchildren had children went, and some who had no liking for women at all. No one commented on it, however. No one dared, not where it might come to Seren's ears. 3 sisters were exiled from Tarvalon for a year, and twice Moraine was forced to join others in the traitor's court to watch an Aes Sedai stripped and stretched tight on the triangle, then birched till she howled. A ward formed a shimmering grey dome over the stone-paved court, held in the shrieks till they had seemed to crowd in on Moraine. A stifling thought, stifling breath. For the first time in a week she lost focus and shivered in the cold. And not only from the cold, she feared those screams would ring in her ears for a very long time. Waking or sleeping, Seren watched and listened with utter calm. A new Amelin chose her own keeper, of course, and could choose a new mistress of novices if wished. Seren had done both. Oddly, Amira, the stocky woman whose long beaded braids flailed as she worked the birch with a will, was a red, and so was the new keeper, Duhara. Neither law nor custom demanded that either keeper or mistress of novices be of the Amelin's former Arger, yet it was expected. But then whispers told of considerable surprise when Seren had chosen the grey over the red. Moraine did not think any of Tamra's searchers would tell Seren of the hunt for the boy-child. On the day after the second birching, she presented herself in the ante-room of the Amelin study, where Duhara sat rigidly upright behind her writing table, with a red stole hand wide draped around her neck. Her dark dress was so slashed with scarlet it might as well have been all scarlet, a damani. Duhara was slim and beautiful, despite being near a hand and a half taller than she, but the woman's full lips had a meanness about them, and her eyes searched for fault. Moraine reminded herself that, without the keeper's stole, Duhara would have to jump when she snapped her fingers, should she have chosen to. As she opened her mouth, the door to the Amelin study banged open, and Seren strode out with a paper in her hand. "Duhara, I need you—" "Now, what do you want?" That last was barked at Moraine, who curtsied promptly, and as deeply as she had as a novice, kissing the great serpent ring on the Amelin's right hand before rising. That ring was Seren's own. Welcome in. Thank you very much for the raid. What were you also doing? Writing and reading? Cool. What were you reading? And how did it go? Where are you up to with it? Also, welcome in anybody who came in with the raid. I'm your Pop Dick. I don't generally have a schedule, mostly because I actually have a spinal fusion in my neck, and so I can never really tell when I'm going to have pain or not. So the pain stops me from streaming a lot. Reading is something that I've recently gotten into. Before that, I basically would play games like, Star Citizen or Timberborn or DayZ and things like that. But yeah, look, I do have a Discord, so you can get notifications there when I'm live. The link is in the About Me below me. Or I'm fairly certain if you hit !Discord, it might have a thing. But just scroll down and click the Discord button. It's easier. I generally only go for around about 2 hours at a time maximum these days, simply because sitting in the one position for too long ends up hurting a bit too much. But I do have a sit-stand desk to mitigate the pain levels considerably. Alright, so where we up to at the moment is the former Amelin has just passed away, and they've picked a new one from the Grey, who's basically a red, but not really. Yeah, well, I lay on my bed and play games with my ally. Or I harass my cat, one of the two. I've also recently gotten into using my 3D printer to print molds to then cast resin. So I've made a Vampire the Masquerade hunger die here. Hasn't yet been completely finished off, but, that's pretty cool. Using one thing to do another thing with another thing. It's, lots of fun. Anywho, Duhara, I need you to... Now, what do you want? At last was barked at Moraine, who curtsied promptly, and as deeply as she had as a novice, kissing the great serpent ring on the Amelin's right hand before rising. That ring was Siren's only display of jewellery. Her 7-striped stole was half the width of Duhara's stole, and her dark grey silks were simply cut. Quite plump, her round face appeared to have been constructed for jolliness, but she wore implacable grimness as though it had been carved there. Moraine could almost look at her straight in the eye. Hard eyes. Her mouth felt dry as she had not fought to shiver in a cold, then suddenly seemed worse than the heart of winter. I read that wrong. Her mouth felt dry, and she had fought not to shiver in a cold that suddenly seemed worse than the heart of winter, but quickly calming exercise failed to produce the composure necessary. She had learned a great deal about Siren from the whispers about the new Amelin. One fact struck deep, right that moment, like a sharp knife. To Siren, her own view of the law was the law, and without a shred of mercy to be found in it, or in her. Mother, I asked to be relieved of my duties regarding the bounty. Her voice was steady, thank the light. The clerks are carrying out the task quickly as they can, but making them stand in a line each day for a sister to approve what they have done only robs them of hours it could be working. Siren pursed her mouth as though she had bitten a sour persimmon. I'd stop that full bounty entirely if it wouldn't put the tower in bad odour. A ridiculous waste of coin. Very well, the clerks may send their papers to another for signature. A Brown, perhaps. They'd like that sort of thing. Moraine's heart soared before the Amelin added, "You will remain in Tarvalon, of course. As you know, we will have need of you soon." "As you say, mother," Moraine replied, heart sinking into her stomach, down to her ankles after that brief flight. Offering another deep curtsy, she kissed the Amelin's ring once more. With a woman like Siren, best not to take chances. Suan was waiting in her rooms when she returned. Her friend leaned forward expectantly and looked a question. "I am free of the bounty, but I am ordered to remain in Tarvalon. As you know, we will have need of you soon." She thought that a fine mimicry of Siren's voice, if a bit strict with bitterness. "Fish guts," Suan muttered, leaning back. "What will you do now?" "I'm going for a ride. You know where I will be, in what order." Suan's breath caught. "The light protect you," she said after a moment. There was no point in waiting. So Moraine changed into a riding dress, with Suan's help to make the changing faster. The dress was a suitably dark blue, with a few leafy silver vines, climbing the sleeves to encircle the high neck. All of her darkest garments were embroidered, but she had begun to think a little needlework might not be so bad. Leaving her shawl folded in the tall wardrobe, she took out a cloak lined with black fox. She tucked her hairbrush and comb into one of the small pockets the cloakmaker had sewn inside, had her sewing kit into the other. Gathering her riding gloves, she gave Suan a hug and hurried out. Long goodbyes would have turned to tears, and she could not risk that. Sisters in the corridor glanced at her as she passed, but most seemed intent on their own affairs. The Chiron and Sheriam both said it seemed a cool day for a ride. Only Edith said more, stopping her with a half-raised hand, eyeing her in a way that seemed all too like Lelany. "Ruined farms and villages will hardly make for a refreshing outing, I fear," the white-haired sitter murmured. "Siren had ordered me to remain in Tarvalon," Moraine replied, her face a perfect Aes Sedai mask, "and I think she might see crossing one of the bridges for a few hours as disobedience." Edith's mouth tightened for an instant, so briefly it might have been Moraine's imagination. She clearly had read Siren's revelation of the plans in that response, and she was displeased. The Amelin can be fearsome towards anyone who goes against her wishes in the smallest way, Moraine. Moraine almost smiled. Like the woman had given her a chance to say it straight out. Well, nearly straight. A suitable Aes Sedai answer. "As well, I do not intend to cross a bridge, then. I have no wish to be birched." In the west stable she had arrows saddled, without saddlebags. There was no need for them for a ride in the city, and no matter what she had told Edith, the sitter might send someone to check. Moraine would have. With luck, no one would suspect anything before nightfall. Her first stop was Mistress Dormali's, where the banker had a number of letters of right ready in various amounts and 4 fat leather purses containing 200 crowns in gold and silver between them. The coin would sustain Moraine for some time. The letters of rights were for after the coin was gone, and for emergencies. Once she used one, she would need to move fast. The tower's eyes and ears would be looking for her, and no matter how discreet bankers were, the tower generally learned what it wanted to learn. Mistress Dormali asked no questions, of course, but on learning that Moraine was alone, she offered 4 of her footmen as escort, and Moraine accepted. She had no fear of footpads, who were few in Tarvalon and easily handled in any event, but if anyone did think of robbery, better they were frightened off by a bodyguard than chased away with the power. That would attract attention. Wealthy women also often rode with bodyguards, even in Tarvalon. The men who walked in a box around Arrow as she departed the bankers might have been called footmen, but though they wore plain grey coats, they were muscular men who looked accustomed to swords hanging from their belts. Doubtless they were the footmen who had overcome Master Gorthanes, or whatever his true name was. They, or men like them, banks always had guards, though never called that. At Tamor's shop, she sent 2 men with coin to purchase the travel trunk and hire a pair of porters, then changed into one of the riding dresses that marked her as a minor Kyranian noble. 3 of the 5 were embroidered, but lightly. She did not complain. Too late to have it picked out in any case. Tamor asked no more questions than Mistress Dormali had. One deferred to one's seamstress, but in the end she was a seamstress. And 2, seamstresses had their own sense of discretion, or they did not remain in the business long. Before leaving, Moraine tucked her great serpent ring into her belt pouch. Her hand felt oddly naked without it. Her finger itched for the small circle of gold, but too many in Tarvalon knew what it meant, for now she truly must hide. With her small entourage, she progressed northward, making stops that filled the chest on the porter's shoulder poles with the needful things that she could not put out of the tower unnoticed, until at last they reached North Harbour, where the city walls curved out into the river and made a ring near a mile across, broken only by the harbour mouth. Wooden roofed docks lined the inside of that huge ring, and moored river ships in every size. A few words with the dock mistress, a heavy-set greying woman with a harassed expression, gained her directions to the Blue Wing, a 2-masted vessel. Blue Wing was not the largest vessel at the docks, but it was scheduled to sail within the hour. Soon enough, Arrow had been hoisted aboard a long wooden boom, with straps beneath her belly, and secured on deck. The porters had been paid off, the footmen sent away with a silver mark each in hand, and her trunk made snug in a small quarter-deck cabin. Still, she would be spending more time than she would like in that cabin, so she remained on deck scratching Arrow's nose while the river ship was untied and pushed off, and the long sweeps pushed out into manoeuvre Blue Ring across the harbour like some immense water bug. That was why she saw the dock mistress pointing to Blue Wing and talking to a man who held his dark cloak around him tightly while he stared at the vessel. Immediately she embraced Saidar, and everything became clearer in her sight, sharper. The effect was not so good as a fine looking-glass, yet she could make out the man's face, peering avidly from his hood. Mistress Dormali's description had been exact. He was not pretty, but good-looking despite the scar at the corner of his left eye. He was very tall for a Kyranian, close to 2 paces. But how had he found her here, and why had he been searching? She could not think of a pleasant answer to either question, least of all the second. For someone who wanted to stop the whole scheme, someone who wanted another house than Damodred on the Sun Throne, the easiest way would be the death of the Halls candidate. Fixing the fellow's face in memory, she let the power drain away. Another reason to take great care, it appeared. He knew the vessel she travelled by, and likely every stop intended between here and the borderlands. That had seemed the best place to begin, far from Kyran and easily reached by river. "Is Blue Wing a fast ship, Captain Carney?" she asked. The captain, a wide, sun-dark man with narrow moustaches waxed to spikes, stopped shouting orders and put on a semblance of respectful smile. He had been quite pleased to take a noblewoman's gold for herself and a horse. "The fastest on the river, to be sure, my lady," he said, and returned to shouting at his crew. He already had half the gold and only needed to show respect enough to ensure he got the rest. Any captain might have said the same of his vessel, but when the wind caught the triangular sails, Blue Wing leaped like its namesake, all but flying out of the harbour mouth. At that moment, Moraine passed into disobedience to the Amelin seat. Oh, Siren surely would have seen it the instant she left left the tower. But intention was not action. Whatever penance the woman set likely would combine labour, deprivation, mortification of the flesh, and mortification of the spirit, on top of which she almost certainly had an assassin trailing her. Her knees should have been shaking in fear of Siren, if not Master Gorthani's. But as Tarvalon and the tower began shrinking behind her, all she felt was a great burst of freedom and excitement. They could not put her on the sun throne now. By the time the hall found her, another would be secure in it, and she was off to find the boy-child. She was off on an adventure as grand as any undertaken by an Aes Sedai. And that, my friends, is the end of today, or at least the end of reading. For the past half a chapter, I've actually had shooting pains down my left arm, which is a sign that I've done a bit too much. So hopefully you will forgive me for being in pain. Not that there's much to forgive. Look, I thank you very, very much for coming and hanging out. And do you have any suggestions of any other book readers who might be worth a look into? Why are you playing up, you stupid mouse? Why is it that when I want to actually do something, my mouse fucks up? How about we go old school? Oh. I apologize for the noises. I'm just having trouble with mouse action at the moment, so I figured I might try to... Oh. You're going to screw up on me too? Maybe it's a computer issue. Maybe I need to blow my computer up. Anybody got some dynamite that I can grab easily? Oh, it's working. It's working. And no, it's not working. Why? Oh my god. Cool. Well, I'm suffering from some mouse issues and input device issues at the moment, so I'm going to have to just raid out the easy way to somebody that I know. Let's... Let's go to Alpaca. He's always fun. This guy is a friend of mine. He's a VTuber. He has a awesome community. You will be welcomed there. He's not reading. He will be playing Lethal Company with at least 3 other friends. So let's go throw some love at Alpaca Treats. And if it's not entirely to your liking, then that is completely fine. You don't have to stick around and... Wow. Why? Hey, Wendon. Sorry, I am having some mouse issues. Right, I've got it copied. Oh. Yep, you just missed out on me reading 2 more chapters. But, yeah, I figured that was probably the case. And vast asynchronicity. I will throw you a follow as soon as I finish up here, and I'll throw a follow at the person that you suggested as well. Pierce likes things. I found them already on my thing. Oh, fuck you!
What were you reading so right? Oh shit, I like your stress, definitely will do. You know, I will no, I'm not stretching my legs, I just like to instantly. No, I'm sitting back down. Alright, so real quick, so hello everyone from ePoptics chat. I am Alpaca Treats. I am an alpaca, and y'all are treats for being here. We're currently switching over to at the moment. But yeah, thanks everyone for being here. Hope you're all doing well. I'm not PNG tuber. I'm right here. Not be confused by the about page. No, I'm actually not a VTuber. And I do a variety of different streams. So some days I usually do multiplayer stuff with my friends. I usually stream on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. At the moment, I'm going to be going through Lies of P Overture, the DLC. And about to start the clear, obscure post-game content. So if you guys are keen for that, then please be sure to leave a follow. Thanks so much, ePoptic, for the raid. I hope you're doing well. I think we're about to load up Pete. I'm going to get a poll right now. see where we're at. See, love chicken.
Alright, I'll
Alright, Benito.
hydrate and I'll stretch. I'm not shrinking, I've got a new chair.
I went to go stretch and then my leg almost instantly cramped up. I'm not doing that again. Yeah, no.
Like, how did your fucking leg cramp from a fucking stretch?
I'm as surprised as you are. No, if you contort your leg in like the right angle, you immediately just fuck yourself. And you just like,
I'm still between. Hey, how are there already updates for your mods?
Good question. Now you have control of your mouse again. Hello! How do you recommend the Minecraft movie? I can't really see that.
I'm never gonna say that.
I will only ever properly go to watch it if we do a drinking game for it. Viewers? No. Could you imagine though?
Properly go and watch it. I'm like,
Oh no.
go to the theaters. And I would expect like, oh, if your friends invite you or something, if we're gonna be playing a game, what?
No, that could never happen. As soon as the chicken jockey rule starts coming into effect, people get killed, I think. Oh yeah, shit. Okay.